Okay, friends, welcome back to the Tribecast. We are joined once again by Naomi Kahn, the director of the International Division at Regavim. And today we're going to be discussing some really pivotal and unprecedented legislation in Yehuda v'Shomron, Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank. The legislation that passed, we spoke about last time, was regarding the demolition of the possession of construction equipment used for illegal construction in Judea and Samaria. And we're going to be discussing how the past week or so went in terms of the execution of that, a brief update and discussion on that. And then we will talk about most recent legislation, which is about essentially the nullification of an old Jordanian law that prevented Jews from buying land in Judea and Samaria. So it's a very racist law, and we look forward to jumping right in without further delay.
It's going very, very well. As we expected, this is a major tool in the arsenal of the Israeli government to prevent illegal construction and illegal infrastructure work. Actually, the day that we spoke last, the day that we discussed the new orders, these new administrative powers, they were impounding heavy machinery on that same day. So we had one incident in Gush Etzion. We have had more in the neighborhoods surrounding Jerusalem, parts of Jerusalem. In Beit Hanina, there was another equipment seizure yesterday afternoon. And as we mentioned, this is a double whammy because not only does it stop that particular project, de-incentivizes future projects, it holds on to this equipment that is being used for the creation de facto of illegal annexation of Israeli state land all over Yehuda Shomron, Jerusalem, and elsewhere.
Okay, so how's it been going on the ground? I've seen a lot of headlines.
Yes, there are a lot of headlines. There's a lot of activity. In addition to impounding the equipment, there's also been unprecedented enforcement against standing illegal structures and illegal infrastructure elements in the Jerusalem envelope in particular. And we've seen over the past few days, literally dozens of illegal structures taken down, many of them not permanent structures, but still, those are always generally the precursor of a more permanent annexation of the territory. And from a political standpoint, a light construction structure, meaning a pen or a mobile unit or things made out of light construction paneling, are just as damaging as brick and mortar. So it's very encouraging. The government has actually changed its approach from reactive to proactive down on the ground. And we're very encouraged by the results and also by I would say, the general atmosphere is now making it much, much less conducive to simply running roughshod over Israeli jurisdiction and sovereignty. And that's very encouraging.
Yeah, I look forward to the next 3 months or 6 months to see Regavim map out some charts about new illegal construction starts in areas A, B, and C by the Arab communities.
Correct. So our most recent mapping showed a very serious decline, 50% decline in new illegal construction starts in Area C, which is a massive...
From when? What are the dates on that?
2025. We tracked all of the construction in 2025, and what we came up with was a 50% drop in new illegal construction starts, as well as drastic increase in demolitions of existing structures. So that report hopefully will be available in English in the next couple of days. It's already prepared in Hebrew and has been presented to the Knesset. So we're going to be publicizing that most recent mapping, which we will probably step up now that most of the staff is back to normal schedules. The majority of our field staff served in reserve duty and active combat duty for an extraordinary amount of percentage over the past 3 years. Now they're more or less coming back to normal work, so we'll be able to document more frequently the actual changes on the ground.
That's great. So that's 2025 compared to 2024?
Correct.
All right, great. We look forward to seeing that.
We compared it to 2023 in the previous government. The change is radical. There's no other way of describing it. Under the previous government, under the quote-unquote government of change, the Bennett-Lapid coalition, illegal construction was off the charts. It was rampant. It was actually very, very frightening. And under this government, the tide has completely been turned in the other direction.
Why do you think that is? I mean, the war probably played a large role in that, right?
No, I think it's more of an overall ideological approach to Yehuda and Shomron. It's an interesting thing. Naftali Bennett, when he was Minister of Defense, came out with us in the field, took our research, took our mapping, and began to talk about fighting the battle for Area C. And as soon as he became prime minister, that went out the window. He forgot all about it and did absolutely nothing in that direction. For political reasons, I assume. He had a coalition that he wanted to maintain, and that coalition was definitely did not create a favorable climate to law enforcement and to Israeli jurisdiction in Area C. The current government came in determined to change that and to reassert the rights of Jews in Yehuda and Shomron and to reassert the state of Israel's jurisdiction, at the very least, in these areas. So the things that we're seeing now did not necessarily all require, any of them did not require any new legislation. It simply required resolve to enforce existing law, regulations, and jurisdiction.
Very interesting.
With some exception, which is our next topic, that there are some actual legislative changes that were required.
Before we go there, I just wanted to ask, it seems, and this will segue nicely into there, it seems that the pendulum swings, right? It depends on whether it's a right-wing government or a left-wing government in terms of the illegal new starts. It sounds like both communities, the Jewish and the Palestinian Authority residents, they sort of take signals from the government. I mean, I haven't seen the chart, but I'm assuming that it would map out nicely according to government whether or not there were the number of illegal starts in Area C and probably A, B, and B as well. So what are your thoughts in terms of the sort of permanence of this type of atmosphere and the longevity of this 50% decline and maybe even further in the coming years, depending on, what's the role of the government, whether it's right or left, in terms of making that a long game? And then we can maybe jump into the difference between that and the legislation that was recently passed as opposed to this demolition order.
So it's a good question. How much of this is reversible? How much of it is the whim of one government or another, one minister of defense or another, one Ramatkal or another? And the truth of the matter is, there are two elements, let's put it that way, as there always are. There's what we call, in Hebrew, we say, there's avoiding bad things and proactively doing good things. So avoiding bad things is meaning keeping the territory under control is something that every government has to do, is required to do. That is why they exist. And the state of Israel took responsibility for Area C and ceded responsibility for other areas under the understanding that law and order would be upheld in another way that would not require our involvement. That has fallen through. And I think it is clear to every politician, and I don't think it's just me that thinks so, because recent votes in the Knesset, for example, where over 90 members of Knesset voted against Palestinian statehood, that would never have happened before the events of October 7th. It would never have happened before the actual impact of this government's activity began to bear fruit. And I think that what once was called centrist parties understand now as well that depending on the Palestinian Authority, empowering the Palestinian Authority, and subcontracting our defense out to others and relying on the goodwill of essentially sworn enemies is a very bad idea. So I think there's a general consensus, I think, amongst all the Zionist parties that what was will no longer be, that we cannot afford to ignore things that are presented as civilian activity when they are, in fact, very, very serious security threats. And the only way to prevent any future October 7th or worse, and I will remind you that the interface between Israel and Gaza is minute compared to the interface within Judea and Samaria and all of Judea and Samaria to Little Israel, as we call it. We have borders all around us. Some of them we've created, and we have to actually protect them. So I think there's a consensus. Now, I don't think that very much of what has been achieved under this government is reversible. And I think that the members of this government, this coalition in general, understand that there is a time clock ticking above their above their administration. So they are focusing on things that will create a reality that is irreversible. That means creating infrastructure that will enable Israel to police itself, to police the area, that will be able to protect itself, that will reestablish rights to territory in Yehuda and Shomron and will roll back permanently the clock on certain aspects of the Oslo framework, even without publicly declaring that that is the case. So those are things like taking back enforcement for environmental issues, protection of archaeological sites. All of those things are essentially irreversible and are long overdue.
Okay, and that's mostly because of consensus, or mostly, I mean, that's not legislation that was passed. And like maybe unpack that for us. Like what's the difference between having an overall consensus between the quote unquote left and the right, and then what's the difference between that and actually passing new laws that that are less easy
So
to reverse like a pendulum?
I'll illustrate how powerful a government decision can be. In 1967, the government of Israel decided, simply put, Attorney General decided that Israel should refrain from reasserting its sovereignty over the area repatriated in its war of self-defense. Yes? How impactful was that decision? There was no law passed. It was a government decision about how to treat this territory. And that is still impacting every single minute of every single day of every single life in Yehuda and Shomron to this day. These things are very, very powerful. And a government decision is not something that is easily reversed. Enforcement of the decision can vary. It can be prioritized or deprioritized. On the other hand, a government decision essentially is a binding policy statement of the government of Israel. So there are things that are stronger, and that is legislation. But in Yehuda and Shomron, the decision or a military order is essentially parallel to legislation by the Knesset inside sovereign Israel. So essentially, when the military commander issues an order, that order is the law in Yehuda and Shomron. And the government has now instructed the commander of Central Command, who is essentially the sovereign or the lawmaker in Yehuda and Shomron, to issue certain orders that cannot easily be reversed. So these things are significant policy shifts. To our mind, these are all things that we've been working on for almost 2 decades in some cases, and they are crucial. And I believe they are promote the pursuit of law and order, which always promotes peaceful existence. To say that, enforcing the law is a bad thing, you have to really examine what it is that bothers you if you're against enforcing the law. Something's wrong.
Well, I guess the confusing part for the American audience is when you say order, it sounds more like it's the prime minister or the president of the president of the United States making an executive order. Here, it sounds like it's a significantly different type of a thing.
It's not significantly different because it's very hard for non-Israelis. It's actually very hard for everyone to understand exactly what the situation in Yehuda and Shomron is. When Israel decided not to extend Israeli law to this territory, to hold its sovereignty in abeyance in order to negotiate a solution in 1967, essentially what it did was to fill that void, you have to create some sort of framework, some legal framework. So what's the legal framework? In general, the sovereign here is it's not the prime minister and it's not the government per se, directly in charge, because this is not considered part of sovereign Israel. Directly in charge is the commander of Central Command. It is a military government. So when the chief of that military government issues an order, that is like a presidential decree, and that is binding. And that is what it is. And it is not easily overturned. You can create possibly another order that will supersede it at some point, but it is not an easy thing to do because the military commander, again, in Israel as a democracy, the military is subject to the democratically elected government. So when the government instructs the military commander to issue an order, and that order itself is the law, but the source of that law comes from the government of Israel. So those things are permanent and they're serious and they have weight and they have impact on the ground.
I remember there was a lawsuit several years ago that Regavim filed with the courts about a prime minister or the upper echelons of a government being able to just give away land in negotiations. Maybe tell us a little bit about that in the context of this.
Yes. So the ability of the government to cede territory or to give away national assets is actually subject to national referendum. That was a law that was passed by the Knesset, not this Knesset, previous Knesset, before that one even. So there's a national referendum law. If the state of Israel chooses, again, to trade land for some illusory peace agreement or something like that, or even a real peace agreement, there's a requirement under, it is essentially a constitutional level law that would require a national referendum to approve that sort of a secession of territory or assets.
It wasn't always that way, though, right?
No, it was not. The lessons learned from the past have had impact. Unfortunately, they leave out certain things, or they left certain things unclear, such as maritime assets, offshore assets, territorial waters. Those sorts of things weren't included because there was a focus on actual ceding of territory. So that left the door open for an absolutely scandalous deal that was cut by Yair Lapid in his short and catastrophic time as prime minister, where he gave away very, very serious national assets offshore. And so now we are working on making
That's the
sure
gas
that,
reserves.
yes. So now we're making sure that all of our national assets are included under this sort of constitutional level requirement for referendum so that we don't end up being actually enslaved or sold short by short-sighted or vested interests.
Okay, so what's the difference between, in other words, how permanent is that governmental, as that constitutional play, as opposed to the requirement for the governmental order, for the military order? In other words, that was a major well, there is no constitution, but that was
Correct.
that was written into
Constitutional
law.
level. Correct.
Yeah,
That
constitutional
is
level.
what is called a basic law. So
Yeah,
the
and then
basic laws of Israel require very, very particular special majorities, and essentially the same as parallel to a constitutional amendment in the United States. You would require a very, very particular constellation, a very particular supermajority, and it would have to be followed by a national referendum as well. So it's very serious and very binding.
And now compare that to the 1967 move that basically gave the power to the military to make these orders in Yehuda Shimon specifically.
The 1967 decision did not actually cede any territory to anyone, or never did entertain the idea of ceding territory. What it did was to leave the door open for a negotiated resolution regarding the political status of the people living in the area repatriated after during the 6-Day War. Yes, so between 1948 and 1967, the Jordanians illegally occupied and eventually annexed the territory of Judea and Samaria and East Jerusalem, parts of it, and did two things, both of which were violations of international law. Well, three things. The first thing was actually attacking the state of Israel. That is a violation of international law. The second thing is taking the sovereign territory of a sovereign state. Israel was the only sovereign with claims to Yehuda, Shomron, and East Jerusalem. So that was a violation of international law. And the third thing that they did was they ethnically cleansed all of those areas of all Jews, meaning all Jews were either banished, exiled from the territories, or massacred. Some were taken prisoner, but the entire region that was occupied by Jordan was cleared of all of its Jews, ethnically cleansed. That is also a violation of international law. And then the next thing that they did was a further violation of international law. They moved people into those territories, sometimes by force, by creating refugee camps and moving people into them and not allowing them to this very day to leave those camps, denying them citizenship and right of passage, etc. But that's another violation of international law. All of these people at the time, until the late 1980s, had Jordanian citizenship, but they were moved into areas that Jordan had illegally occupied in that war in 1948. So in 1967, the government of Israel did not decide to cede any of this territory. It decided that it would have to resolve the political status of the people who had been moved in there, the people who were living there. And it also opened the gates at that time for Jews who wished to do so to return to the areas from which they had been ethnically cleansed. There was none of this question of ceding territory. No one ever imagined that this territory would be given away in 1967. It was all a question of leaving the door open for political negotiation regarding the status of the people who were living there. Israel did not want to forcibly first of all, did not want to remove people who were there, although by right it had the right to do so in many cases. The people who were placed there illegally by the Jordanians had no actual connection to the area and should not have been forced to stay there. That was number one. And number two is Israel just doesn't do that. It doesn't mass transfer people out of the territory. It was looking for a negotiated resolution, possibly some sort of confederation with Jordan, because these people held Jordanian citizenship, possibly giving them rights of passage to leave so that they would not be forced to live as a minority in the Jewish state. All these things were on the table, but there was no discussion at the time of ceding territory. So it would not have been impacted one way or the other. Simply put, the government of Israel balked, it hesitated, it did not stake its claim to sovereignty over these territories swiftly and clearly, and we are paying the price for that today.
Okay, and now fast forward to last week.
The government issued decisions. One of them was something that we had been seeking to remedy for many years. We actually went to the Supreme Court about this quite a number of years ago. The question was, what is the status of laws that Israel still upholds in this territory, in which it did not extend Israeli law, laws that are clearly racist, anti-Semitic, retrograde, and were created by the Jordanians to keep Jews out, to maintain that ethnic cleansing that they had instituted in 1948. So one of those laws is called Jordanian Law Number 40, which prohibits the sale of land. And this was true in all of Jordan, all of the territory of Jordan, as well as the territory occupied by Jordan, Judea and Samaria, and East Jerusalem. Actually forbidding the sale of land to non-Jordanians or non-Muslims, right? So unless you were a Jordanian citizen or a Muslim, you, until this past Sunday, were prohibited from purchasing land in Judea and Samaria. That's you, that's me, that's every Jewish person in the world, every Christian person in the world who is not a Jordanian citizen as well. And this is clearly a racist law. This is clearly an anti-Semitic law, although it is couched in the general terms of strangers, non-Muslims or non-Jordanians. It was clearly targeting the people most heavily impacted by this law is the Jewish community. So Jews throughout the world are prohibited from buying land in Judea and Samaria. This law, aside from being repulsive in terms of everything that we hold dear about civil rights and equality under the law, the government of Israel was afraid to strike it down because it was afraid to be accused of actually extending Israeli law to the contested territories of Judea and Samaria, and did not want to be construed as taking steps that would express some sort of sovereignty. So instead of striking the law down in the 1970s, the Israeli government created a workaround. That required a change in legislation as well. It required a military order stating that Israeli companies could incorporate in the Judea and Samaria registry of corporations, and the corporation could purchase land and then turn around and sell it to individuals. So it added levels of bureaucracy, levels of expense, levels of time to all of these things. It also required that anyone who was not a Muslim or a Jordanian would have to have special permission at various levels to carry out land transactions, even if the seller.
Hold on, just fill in some blanks for me. Fill in some blanks for you. So this was by the court. The court basically said, we accept the racism against Jews, and here's your workaround.
Strange as it sounds, more or less that's it. It's not the court. The military governance of this area, the attorney general, state's attorney for the state of Israel, all of them sort of scratched their heads and said, okay, this is racist. It's a problem. This kind of limitation would not stand anywhere else in the world. But if we strike it down, we're going to be accused of creeping sovereignty. So what do we do?
Well, in Jordan, wasn't it? It was a law in Jordan until like the 90s, was it, or the early 2000s? It was repealed eventually by Jordan.
Correct. So the crazy thing about it is Jordan's occupation of Judea and Samaria was universally condemned. Only 2 countries in the world recognized it. So the laws passed by the Jordanians, theoretically, legally, have no standing at all in Judea and Samaria because they were not recognized as a sovereign. But in any case, those laws were on the books. They were in action, and the state of Israel continues to uphold them to this very day.
I just don't understand if Jordan themselves repealed the law. In other words, the original reason for not repealing the law that is racist against Jews, preventing Jews from purchasing land in Judea and Samaria, was because they didn't want to mess up the relationship with Jordan. Jordan itself, decades later, repeals the law, and the courts are still, they were still upholding that racist law against Jews?
Correct. Because they weren't actually enforcing it because of this workaround. And
Oh, okay.
the fact of the matter is that it added levels of complication, time, expense, bureaucracy, it allowed all sorts of points along the process to be interfered with and to be attacked and challenged by leftist organizations, Arab, whatever. It opened the door to a lot of mess. Long story short, the 570,000 Jews living in Judea and Samaria are proof that the workaround actually does work in many cases. But what we argued was creating workarounds is a disgusting, essentially, it's a capitulation to the worst of the worst. Meaning your laws or the laws you uphold are an expression of values. And to express this value, to give a silent nod to this value, that Jewish rights are less valuable than Muslims' rights, or that Jewish rights are somehow something that can be bargained with or something that can be held in abeyance in order to appease anyone, that is a disgusting statement. That is really a repulsive, repugnant approach to the basic concept of inalienable rights and equal protection under the law. And we said, the workaround is one thing, but you're expressing a value here that should not be allowed to be expressed. Imagine if tomorrow in the United States, a law was passed that said only Christians can buy land. How do you think that would go? It would be kind of a problem, right? If you have in Sweden, in Norway, in Great Britain, a law passed limiting rights to carry out legal transactions on the basis of religion or race, it's impossible, right? Why is it possible when it's Jewish rights that are involved? It should not be. And the state of Israel, of all places, should not be the ones who are enforcing that. So the fear of international repercussions, which of course we're hearing now, all these condemnations by hypocritical Western quote unquote democracies who are very, very concerned, alarmed, condemned Israel's creeping annexation. This has nothing to do with annexation. This has nothing to do with, as far as I'm concerned, even if it does make it easier for Jews to purchase land. I can purchase land in Jordan too. That doesn't mean I'm annexing it. I can purchase land in Manhattan. I'm not annexing it. These are basic principles of modern commerce, of proprietary rights, right? Aside from everything else, your laws express your values. And there are other things that Israel is upholding in Judea and Samaria through the back door, not necessarily even enforcing them, but not striking them down on the merits that are repulsive. There are elements of Sharia law that are governing commerce that should never have been allowed to happen.
Good. So give us a snapshot of before and after this change. We needed corporation, we needed lawyers we need to spend a lot more money on lawyers, etc. And again, we're talking about purchasing private land, not state land, correct?
Correct.
So this is
not
about the state of Israel or the various councils throughout Judea Samaria designating a new yishuv or designating an expansion of number of houses. This is about an individual Jewish person purchasing land from an individual Jewish Arab for a sum of money that the Arab is now welcoming and will not have to go to jail, correct?
From an Arab, it can be from a Jew. The house that I live in, the house that I built, which is over the Green Line, is on land that has been owned by a Jewish family since 1909. Bought, paid for, registered, all signed, sealed, delivered. And I can't have it registered to my name because Sharia law prohibits this whole transaction. Jewish transactions in Yehuda and Shomron have been subjected to Sharia law. This is insanity. And there's nothing about it that is, some decree from heaven. This was a decision made by certain legal advisors to the IDF who said, you know what, in order to maintain the temporary nature to uphold our temporary status here as a caretaker rather than a sovereign, let's make sure that we maintain the laws that were enforced before. Well, pardon me, when those laws are misogynist, racist, backward, discriminatory, they should not be upheld. And it doesn't matter what the political ramifications are. We have a duty, the government of Israel has a duty to protect the rights of Jewish people and to move the area out of backwardness and into some sort of normal transactional reality in which people can buy and sell property, can make the profit that they deserve to make, can live their lives in a normal fashion, both Jews and Arabs here.
Fine. So point is clear, but I just want to understand mechanically, what does this mean? So when the Palestinian Authority, it's illegal, it's tragic, first of all, just aside, it's a tragedy that people of the major media companies, the press, the journalists, don't understand that it's illegal for a Palestinian Authority citizen or to sell land to a Jew without capital punishment or life imprisonment or complete excommunication from family and community, etc. And their lives are literally at risk. People don't know that. And so now let me ask you in the context of this.
Some of them do know that, and they're in favor.
I've spoken to Pulitzer Prize winning journalists that had no clue about this, no
Correct.
clue.
Because
And
they
they
don't
were
want
reporting on Gaza, they were reporting on, Yehuda
They don't want to.
Vashomron.
But there are real estate brokers from the Palestinian Arab community who were excommunicated to the point where they were not allowed to be buried in Muslim cemeteries. And the state of Israel had to see to their burial because the Palestinian Authority would not allow them to be buried. We have people who were imprisoned, people who were given death sentences, people who were actually killed for land transactions.
People still in prison. People are still in prison, I'm told, in Hebron. But
Correct.
again, to that point, does the state of Israel now interject themselves into the relationship between the Palestinian Authority, legal, the police or whatever it is that arrests these people? Do they now stop those arrests? Because it seems that the law that still stands within Palestinian Authority territories is in complete contradiction to the law that Israel is now enforcing in Judea and Samaria.
Israel has no interest. Well, it has an interest, but only a backdoor interest, has no ability and has no plans, as far as I know, to involve itself in the internal legal framework of the Palestinian Authority. That's not something that's going to happen. We're not going to tell them what the rules are and what the rules are not. But first and foremost, land transactions between Jews in Judea and Samaria will be simplified tremendously. I don't even know how to say it. Will become much less expensive to carry out, much more efficient, much more immediate.
Yeah,
I
it's a
believe
big win for the consumer for sure.
correct. It's also, I think, developers who can buy private land now without all these layers upon layers upon layers of bureaucratic nightmares and special permission from the Minister of Defense, from the head of the IDF, from
Yep.
the head of all of these things were layers of bureaucracy that made it very, very daunting to try to build anything in Judea and Samaria. So that's first of all, and that's right off the bat. In terms of land transactions between Arabs and Jews, Arabs from the Palestinian Authority and Israelis. So there's another corollary decision that was announced at the same time, and that is transparency of the land registry. This is a massive issue. There have been, for decades, cases that hit the news where people buy a piece of land and own a property, and then they find out that it actually was sold to them by someone who doesn't own it. And this has happened numerous times where people buy things in good faith. They come to, the property that they have purchased. This has happened in Hebron. This has happened in various places all over Yehuda and Shomron, whole neighborhoods that were purchased in good faith from someone who simply doesn't own the property. And there's a massive industry of fraudulent land deeds and registry and titles. All of this was enabled because the land registry of Judea and Samaria was considered not public. It was never made public, and it is essentially classified information.
Why?
Why? Because of the Palestinian Authority's death sentence to anyone who sells it. So the rationale was if you keep it hidden, then people who want to sell will not be afraid that their heads are going to be cut off by some Palestinian Authority enforcer for trying to do this. So the truth of the matter is that what actually happened was the exact opposite, because the people holding onto the registry would alert the Palestinian Authority anytime an Arab landowner or property owner asked for the deeds for their own property, because that automatically signaled that they were interested in selling it. And so they were subject to it. If it's public knowledge and people can do what they want, I think Americans will understand very, very well. The best antiseptic is daylight. If these things are clear and everyone knows and you don't have to ask anyone's permission to go on the website like you can do anywhere else in Israel, in sovereign Israel, go on the government's website and see every single parcel of land who is registered to, who the legal owner is, whether the taxes were paid up. All of these things
Is
will
that going to be on GovMap?
eventually, but it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, I would imagine.
For now, the first part of it is simply getting a government order, stating a military order, making it accessible. So we will now be able to request it without having to go through this whole literally Byzantine setup of Palestinian Authority, quote unquote, experts who are holding on to the entire land registry.
Fine. So just to go back to the original question, now that we have that background, like what's going to happen when an Arab now is their name is public? It's like much more obvious once you see Jewish people building or a developer building an area. If that was a publicly made, if the Arab name was made public, then they're going to be at serious risk. Is the state of Israel going to be doing anything to
The state of
combat
Israel
the
already
terror
does. So
against that particular person?
I'll tell you what the current situation is, and that is there are Arabs who own land in areas that are completely inaccessible to them. The land essentially is trapped either between Jewish communities in Area C. I would also note that there are Jews who own land, privately owned land, in areas A and B that have been forfeited by the Oslo framework. They will never get them back. The same was true of land that the Jordanians took in 1967 and gave it to other people, simply rewrote the deeds and gave it away, or built refugee camps on privately owned Jewish land. That is forfeit, yes? But Arabs still hold deeds to land that they cannot access. The state upholds, respects, and protects those deeds and recognizes them. So no one will build on them, but the Arabs themselves cannot realize any gain from them, cannot profit from them, and having a hard time selling them. Now they can do that. So they can actually make money off of the property that they own, and you'll find Jewish buyers happy to have them. There are lots of places like this.
Which is a win-win. I mean, if you can solve a lot of this conflict with the swipe of a pen and some cash exchange, it's a lot easier than spilling blood. Ink is better than blood.
And it normalizes the situation.
But how is the whole reason for the lack of transparency, as you said, was because to protect the seller when they are living in Palestinian Authority territories, to protect them from actual capital punishment. So how is this going to take them into consideration? Why would they put their lives at risk? It seems like
their
this
lives
might be
won't be at risk now. Because when an Arab property owner doesn't need to ask for the land deed, but everyone can simply go online and download it themselves.
Including the Palestinian Authority, though.
They know who owns what already, but they don't know when a transaction is being made. And when that transaction is finished, what I can tell you now is many of these Palestinian property owners choose to realize the profits from their holdings and do other things with them. One of them is to buy other property inside areas A or B. One of them is to invest it in all kinds of commerce or whatever. Another thing is to relocate to a place that will not threaten their life for carrying out normal transactional existence, just plain living, right? So
the state helped facilitate that?
That is the rumor.
That is the rumor. Good answer. You must be a professional.
That is the rumor. I'm not involved in any of those aspects of land purchases, but I know that there are Arabs everywhere throughout Judea and Samaria and elsewhere, many Jordanians who own deeds to land that was either gifted to them by the Palestinian Authority at the time or that their ancestors owned, and they cannot do anything with that property until now. So hopefully this will normalize the real estate market and transactions and bring to peaceful resolutions that will clear the path towards a much more normal conversation about these areas.
And it sounds like, I mean, the way you're putting it, it certainly sounds like this is a huge win for the Arab population. I mean, imagine inheriting land or some sort of house it's totally dilapidated. it needs a tremendous renovation and you can't do anything with it. This isn't just Judea and Samaria. This is also in parts of Jerusalem, I think, correct?
Correct. It's not just that you can't do anything with it, you can't even get to it. If you're an Arab living in Jenin and your family owns property near Gush Etzion, you can't really get to it. You can't do anything with it. It's just lying there. On the other hand, the state of Israel can't do anything with it either because it's privately owned by someone else. And the state of Israel is meticulous about respecting those proprietary rights of people, even enemies who hold property deeds. This could be a win-win. This will normalize things. Yes, it will. And I'm not going to deny this. It will certainly facilitate expanded Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria, but it will do it by fully upholding the law and respecting the legal rights of everyone involved.
Now, how does this work in terms? Okay, so at Tribe Journal, we're documenting a lot of the housing challenges that people are facing. Where's affordable housing? We're looking out of the box, pun not intended, to try to find ways to create more affordable housing, whether it's a caravan or a castle. That should be up to the individual to choose. It shouldn't be
Right.
something that's a top-down governmental / developer decision. And so let's say a person decides, they look on this registry, or they know someone who knows someone who knows someone, and they're in touch with an Arab that has land that is available for purchase. And they purchase that land, and they own now quite a bit of land, hundreds or thousands of dunam that
Yeah.
they would love to just put a caravan down, or maybe 20 of them, and give everyone a nice piece of land with a beautiful view that's out in the open, and maybe even a strategic security win.
Right.
What are your thoughts in terms of how does this change that formula, and what are the procedures that would still or need to or not need to be followed? If it's private land, in other words, a lot of this is state land, so therefore the state can dictate what happens on that land. But here now you're talking about individuals being able to actually
Correct.
purchase land and
So
own it, and then it's obviously a zoning question. Tell us a little bit about that.
exactly. Like everywhere else in every other organized normal country, there is a question of zoning. Some land has to be left open, empty, right? Some of it is environmentally crucial as open space. Some of it is already necessary for natural growth of existing communities. Some of it is agricultural. Some of it depends, there is zoning, there is planning. So there's a national plan, a regional plan. The state of Israel has refrained from actually planning for the future of Judea and Samaria for decades. And that is a tragedy. It is a catastrophe. And it is ending now. In the past 2 years since this government was elected, the investment in infrastructure and planning for the future of Judea and Samaria is more than in the 50 years that preceded it combined. So there's roads, there's water systems, there's electrical infrastructure that's being created and produced to support future settlement. Again, I'll just note, and this is one of Regavim's major areas of activity, just because you own a piece of land doesn't mean you can do whatever you want with it or on it. You have to have building permits, and that has to fit into the larger zoning issue, the environmental issues, the planning for the future issues, land use, good, solid, forward-thinking land use policy. In general, in Judea and Samaria, in the early years of settlement, construction was dispersed, single units, and now, over the past couple of years, as part of the master plan for conserving the land resource and using it wisely, there's a lot more multi-units, and the regional planning has been changed in many, many areas to include much more dense construction for greater population density, to make housing cheaper, to use the land resource wisely, to protect the environment, for security reasons as well. But all of these things come into play. And the state of Israel now, finally, at last, since 1967 until 2023, more or less, there was no vision really planned out for the future of Judah and Shamron. And I think that's changing now, certainly for Area C.
Okay, so if a person purchased 1,000 dunam that is in a environmental area, that might be a problem. But however, if a person purchased 1,000 dunam outside of a moshav, then that would be less problematic.
Yes. So you have to remember
And the government, let's say they wanted to open a farm outside a moshav
Mhm.
and they own the land.
Yep.
It's tough to believe that the government would like uproot all the trees of their farm. But if they wanted to build a tower, that would be obviously something that would
Correct.
be a zoning question. And then caravans is probably somewhere in between.
Correct. So there's a lot of things at play here, which is, first of all, just to remind everyone of what the area is that we're talking about, Yehuda and Shomron is probably, in terms of the entire planet Earth, the place where there is the most dense historical record, meaning archaeology. There is nowhere in the world that has, per square inch, as much history buried in it. So you have to be very, very careful of these things. There has to be a full survey. I can tell you, in the neighborhood that I live in, before new houses were built, there had to be a full scale, and this took a couple of years, archaeological excavation to document and preserve and then cover over things of historical significance, full documentation and protection of the area before the construction could begin. In some areas, construction will never be approved because the area is too important or the finds are too unique. But there are things like that. There are also things that tremendously impact the water table. If you're dealing with the mountain aquifer, which provides water to the entire region, or if you're dealing with places that feed into the Dead Sea, desert areas require certain types of construction, certain density, all of these things. There's no rule of thumb. It's not, yes, buy a piece of land, build whatever you want on it because it's yours. It doesn't work that way. So that's why we have zoning, we have planning commissions, we have engineering, structural, and environmental checks before any permits are approved. That's part of the reason why we are so adamant about preventing illegal construction by Arabs, because they're destroying the environment, they are polluting our groundwater, our air, our soil, and they're changing the map politically. You have to also build with sensitivity to where the IDF needs to protect, where you are safe, where there is a foreseeable future for the chain of settlement. All these things come into it. So, and
Okay,
there are
so we spoke with Akiva Bigman, and he spoke about in the 1948 territory, in the 1948 borders, where there were like some 30 years of government saying new community, and nothing happened. And he's pointing to the institutional bureaucracy that is in complete gridlock. Like if there's a special flower, then they're able to basically nullify the will of the government, of the elected government, to start a new community, whether it be up north or down south in the periphery. Does this now create more headache for those looking to move to Judea Samaria, in the sense that that same institutional bureaucracy, which has essentially snubbed the will of the government for 30 plus years, is that now going to start happening in Judea Samaria?
I hope not. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. What I can tell you is that we are addressing other aspects of the entrenched bureaucracies that are decimating Jewish, uh, the Jewish demography in the north of the country, for example, policy and planning regimes that are controlled by anti-Zionist forces that have shrunk or aged out existing Jewish communities all through the Galilee. At their expense, Arab communities have grown insanely in hundreds of percents. Land for Jewish construction in the Galilee is off the charts, hundreds of percents more expensive than for Arab communities. The tax structure is stilted against Jewish development and construction. All of these things are things that we're tackling, and all of these things happen when nobody's looking. So that's why Regavim exists. We're looking. We're trying to push these issues, land use policy issues, into the public consciousness and onto the agenda of the government, because for too long, they just simply, there were too many other things that were catching the attention, and the situation is very, very serious. I encourage you to have a look at our most recent petition against a planning regime created called Vatmal, which is special committees for creating low-cost housing and fast-track housing approvals. And this has been essentially perverted by anti-Zionist forces to whitewash hundreds of thousands of illegal structures and to rob Jewish communities of their ability to grow and develop. It has moved borders between Jewish and Arab communities in the Galilee. All of these things have been done under the smokescreen created by this planning decision. So we're trying to reverse that, and hopefully the lessons learned there will be applied immediately before it even starts in Judea and Samaria.
Okay, great. Looks like we have a good topic for our next discussion. Maybe we can get into try and unpack some of that institutional bureaucracy. Well, Naomi Kahn, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it as always, explaining things so clearly to us. And we look forward to seeing things develop, pun not intended, in the coming weeks, months, and years to come.
Thank you.
At TribeJournal, we tell the untold. You can find more great content like this at tribejournal.org. Thanks for being with us.